can that? How can that not be representing? And how can that? How can that not be representing?
Guarantee you that everybody, whether it be in the FBI or the Department of Justice, is looking back and saying, where did we go wrong?
No legitimate proof that the FBI organized the January 6th Capitol attack.
Roger Stone has just been taken into custody.
Former President Donald Trump says the FBI has searched his Mar-a-Lago home.
We don't operate on innuendo. We don't operate on incomplete information. We don't operate on leaks. We operate based on concrete decisions that are made.
Nothing. No case, no source, no fear of embarrassment is worth jeopardizing the gift of integrity.
Well, I'm John Guandolo. I grew up in Maryland. I went to the Naval Academy. I took a commission as a Marine officer, served in the infantry and reconnaissance communities inside the Marine Corps. I'm a combat veteran. In 1996, I went to the FBI and spent about 5 years in the criminal division. And after 9/11, moved over into the counterterrorism division. I got to be a part of different specialized cases or high-profile national cases. We went after the Atlanta Olympic bomber and the abortion clinic bomber, the 98 embassy bombings, going over to Africa and being there in Nairobi. And because of those skills, I was on the raid team, which was a fairly small raid team to where the bomb was built for the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi after 9/11, being at the Pentagon doing recovery work. And that's the kind of stuff that, as I look back, was in the moment brutal, because like literally being at the embassy and part of my duties was to recover human remains. That's brutal work. Same or similar work at the Pentagon. Through that investigative work, finding that there's this massive network, not in Afghanistan, Iraq, right here in the United States. And that the leaders of these key organizations that are working with Al-Qaeda and Hamas that wear suits, they were meeting with the president, with FBI director, with CIA director, with DHS. They're training people. They're training military people. My response was, this is outrageous. We need to crush this. And let me say this, if the FBI and state security agencies around the United States were doing their job, I would be teaching high school students, which is what I'd love to be doing, but I'm not. I'm putting my talents towards understanding the threat, doing the job that someone else should be doing if they were actually doing their job. So what is the current state of the FBI? Not good. I still have colleagues inside, people that I train. They're solid people. And there are a lot of frustrated men and women in the FBI. The overriding attitude and message I'm hearing from them is, I'm just biding my time to retirement. But some of them are also saying, but I'm not sure that that's the morally right thing for me to do. Like, shouldn't I be fighting to fix this place? But a lot of them feel like there's no fixing the FBI. I go back to this. In 2003, when he was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, which is New York City, arguably the most important U.S. Attorney's office in the United States. James Comey gave an interview to New York Magazine where he said, "I was a communist, not sure where I am politically. I guess I'll have to see." Well, he was literally walking out the door to become the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. If somewhere in the Department of Justice, the FBI, the executive branch of the government, there was some functioning system, the brakes on his new job would have been put on immediately. He would have been investigated. He would have been fired. And they would have looked at him and said, "Oh, you were a communist, not sure if you are or not now, and we're about to make you the Deputy Attorney General." But that's not what happened. What happened was he became the Deputy Attorney General. He remained the Deputy Attorney General, and eventually became the FBI Director. So if you want any more evidence of how penetrated by communists and adversaries of the United States we are, that's it. And that's 20 years ago. Now, the fact that there's been zero purging inside the government, except patriots being purged in the last 20 years, that should give you an idea of the state of the FBI. How do you destroy the FBI? You make a commie the director. This is what they want. You had James Comey, the same guy who said I was a communist, as the director. Andrew McCabe, Deputy Director of the FBI. Peter Strzok, the Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, falsely, knowingly put forth an application to the FISA court to electronically surveil candidate and then President Trump, his family, and his staff. It's a violation of so many laws and their oath of office, arguably treason and sedition. What did the DOJ do? What did Congress do? Nothing. Republicans and Democrats alike, nothing. I do want to tell you about the civil war within the FBI, and it's really this, is there are agents and analysts and employees that are patriots, and they join the FBI or they got employed by the FBI for the same reason that a lot of people join organizations like that. They believe in the mission, they believe in their oaths of office. But here's something I think is important to keep in mind. If 98% of everybody in the FBI were a mad patriot, but only 3 people actually internally are fighting the battle against the adversaries of liberty in the Bureau, then it doesn't matter that there are 99% patriots. If only 1% or 2% or 3 people are opening their mouths, then therein lies the problem. You know, what's the difference between card-carrying communists and patriots who aren't doing anything or don't want to risk their job or their reputation for the sake of the republic? Well, there's no difference, because standing on the sidelines right now is the same as standing in the enemy camp, because we are losing this war and losing it badly. So it's a small number of people within the Bureau that are fighting. I would say a strong percentage of the leadership are focused on their careers, getting to retirement, and that puts them in the enemy camp. And whether they realize that or not, they may be good people, they may be nice people, but by not helping the patriot cause, you're literally standing in the enemy camp. How broken is the Department of Justice? I would argue completely broken. I believe from top to bottom, and I don't think this is in the last couple of years. I think the fact, and I'll go back to the example we used earlier of the FBI director, the deputy director, and the counterintelligence, a leader in the counterintelligence division, Peter Strzok, falsely filing an application to the FISA court. And where is the DOJ investigation of those 3 individuals? Where is the prosecution for treason, for sedition, for lying under oath, for perjuring yourself? I mean, listen, when I worked as a temporary supervisor at FBI headquarters, a lot of what I did was working FISAs. I know the process inside and out, and I can tell you to get a FISA application approved is a monumental task. And it has to go through so many wickets that literally every line, every sentence in that application, and most of these applications are 50 to 150 pages, has to be fact, sourced, And as the supervisor at headquarters working with the case agent in different parts of the country, I'm the one swearing it out. So I'm working with the case agent, like, how do you know this? What's the source? Okay, that's not good enough. I'm literally going to raise my hand and swear to the truth of this. And then I go sit with the attorney, and then I go sit with a high-level DOJ official. And then, as I had to do, you literally go, I did this on several occasions. You go to the FBI director's home, you brief him on it, and then he asks you questions. Like, how do you know this? What's this? And if your stuff's not tight, he's like, go back, get it right, come back. So for an application to get before a judge and then do the same thing before the judge, my point of this is where was DOJ there? Where is DOJ in the Hillary Clinton investigation, where we have solid evidence of classified information being passed to hostile foreign governments on unclassified systems? These are all violations of federal law. The evidence is there and on the table. It's not the FBI director who determines whether a case gets prosecuted or not. It's the DOJ. It's the attorneys. So the fact that James Comey said, we're not going to prosecute. You're the FBI director. You don't prosecute anything. That's the DOJ's job. And this is not a political issue. These are legal matters. DOJ is catastrophically broken. And I believe the same thing with the FBI. Yes, the President, the Attorney General of the United States, and FBI leadership is saying that if you are a patriot, part of the MAGA movement, you are a white supremacist and a lethal threat, which means you are on their target list. I think it's that simple, that clear. Yes, they've completely taken the definition of a threat to America and turned it exactly upside down. Roger Stone told me that CNN called him late evening, 7 in the evening local time, asking him questions. So he literally said, oh, I guess the FBI is going to be at my door tomorrow morning. And he had coffee made and was ready for it because he's smart enough to recognize what this was. When you understand the things we've been talking about, because this is, to me, the main line of this discussion. You have the President of the United States who recently said, this MAGA movement is the most dangerous political movement in American history. A year ago, Mr. Biden said,
terrorism from white supremacy is the most lethal threat to the homeland today. Not ISIS, not Al-Qaeda, white supremacists.
Now, these are legal terms that have real meaning. When the President of the United States says white supremacists are the greatest lethal threat to America, and then he says that MAGA patriots are white supremacists and they're the most hostile political movement, you now have, and by the way, and the Attorney General of the United States echoes these sentiments, then you should expect the entire force of the federal government to come to bear against people that are put in that category. Well, what is the MAGA movement? And I said it earlier, I'm going to say it again. Mr. Trump did not birth the MAGA movement. The MAGA movement was around before Mr. Trump, and it birthed him, and it exists with or without him. Now, some will say, well, he's a major player in it. Okay, that's not the point. The point is, what this movement is are citizens who consider themselves patriots because they believe in the founding principles. They believe that the Declaration is the ideal for our law and government. They believe that the Constitution is the highest law in the land, and that people that swear an oath to that Constitution should bear fidelity to that Constitution. And that a free market economy and liberty under law, these are principles under which we're supposed to operate. Well, the President and the Attorney General have said, anyone who believes that, you are now the greatest threat to the United States. So I would expect things like Roger Stone's residence to be attacked. I would think that people who were merely in Washington, D.C. on January 6th to be attacked. I think if you, as an organization, as TPUSA, don't think that the leadership and executive leaders, you yourself, if you don't think that they're either monitoring you or considering monitoring, I don't think you get what I've been talking about. People like you, of course, they would look at you. Anybody who is a leader in this movement, speaking truth, training people, taking action at the local, state, and federal level, of course they're looking at you, because the leadership of the federal government has said, you are the most lethal threat to the United States. So the question about was the FBI involved in January 6th is a huge question. And how were they involved? was there on January 6th in an area that was permitted by a group that I was just invited to join by a pastor in Dallas who asked me to travel there. And I originally wasn't going to go, but I thought, that this would be great to just be with a bunch of Christians praying for our nation. As I mentioned earlier, I spent most of the day there with a friend of mine in the FBI, and we watched what was going on. Oh, there are 3 Antifa guys walking in right there. But I also watched patriots walk up the steps with their, the Gadsden flag that the FBI says is a sign of militant violent extremism, because they're insane. Well, they're not insane. They're not operating from their constitutional basis. And I watched them talk to Capitol Police. And I watched Capitol Police like halfway up the steps, nod their heads, stand aside, and these guys walked up and walked in. And I watched all this. I will tell you, as a combat vet, standing next to an FBI agent, we're standing there talking, and we look to our left, and a red star cluster goes off. And I looked at that, and I looked at him, and he goes, holy crap, what is about to happen? Like that, nobody's talked about that. And we just kept watching these folks, these clearly Antifa, walk into the Capitol and walk right by us. And I didn't see anyone paying them attention. So here are a few things. I don't know Ray Epps. I can't tell you whether he is or is not an FBI source. But what I did witness is people that were clearly hostile, Antifa or BLM. We did see specific individuals. There's footage and photographs of specific BLM leaders and Antifa leaders inside the Capitol. And what I then witnessed was, I went back to my hotel room when it was over, turned on the TV, and within minutes, I see a group marching down the street with a huge professional banner talking about the insurrection on January 6th. And immediately I'm like, well, that's convenient. When did that banner get made? Chris Burgard, Hollywood guy, I've known for years. He did the film Border. He was in Honduras when they did the color revolution. He's literally standing there on January 6th looking around going, this looks an awful lot like that. But my point is, it's been called an insurrection with no weapons, with no insurrection. I mean, the whole thing is it's just political show. But it's not just political show, because people in jail, people's lives have been ruined, people have lost their jobs, people have been hurt, beaten by the cops for being there, and none of them are held to account. But the patriots are being attacked. That is, to me, is the truth of January 6th. And again, another massive data point on the table that America ho-hums. Up until just a few weeks ago, for over 18 months, I was on a TSA watch list because I was in January 6th, I was in Washington, D.C., and yet I was on a watch list. And when I say that, John, how do you know? Well, besides the fact I was in the FBI and I know what being on a watch list looks like, it looks like 100% of the time, every flight I go on takes about between an hour and a half to get through security. For 3 months, every gate I went to, then there was another level of security where TSA set up a table. And oddly enough, they'd usually screen about 2% of the people getting on board. And I was always one. Weird. But I also think there are a lot of Americans sitting back still looking at all this, wondering, something is drastically wrong. What do I do? So I want to say to those, what I think are millions of Americans who see that things are grossly wrong, make sure your county is fortified. Identify the bad guys, flush them out using legal means, and restore the republic. That's where your focus should be. Don't try to fix the FBI. Don't try to fix Congress. That is a losing cause right now. So let me give you an example from the local level of how a local community can actually fight back. And this is really important. And this is the whole reason, as I said earlier, understanding the threat exists is to train communities to do this. But it's not just giving skills, it's a mindset. It's that over time, as you all have talked about, Americans have transferred, quite frankly, their authority and their responsibility up to what I would call a nanny state. We act like whatever the federal government says goes. That's not at all the way it's supposed to be. So when you have a local community, I'll give you an example. Just recently in Texas, FBI raids a guy's house saying he was somehow involved in January 6th and all this nonsense. The local sheriff does nothing. And in response to citizens asking the sheriff, why didn't you intervene? He's like, well, it's out of my hands. It's a federal matter. The answer is, it's your freaking county. It's your jurisdiction. It's your responsibility. The fact that you're unprofessional and the fact that you're too scared or cowardly to do your duty, that's the problem. Citizens have to hold their local officials culpable. Let's look at what that looks like in reality. Well, the FBI shows up at a citizen's home, whether they're given a heads up or not. If they're given a heads up, the sheriff immediately calls local FBI and says, no, you're not doing that. Before you do anything in my county, I want to see it, right? I want to see it. And if you show up without notifying me, I'm going to put 20 deputies in front of this guy's house and you're not going in. And we will physically block you because it's wrong. And we'll call citizens that we work with in the community and we'll have 100 or 200 of them out there because what you're doing is wrong and I'm not going to tolerate it. And by the way, I'm the law in this county, not you. This is not an Article 6 issue. This is not a supremacy clause issue. This is what you're doing is unjust. And so we're not going to allow it in our county. You can do that with the banks that are doing financing of these groups. Hey, you want to finance Communist China through BLM? Then your bank will shut down in our county. We're shutting this branch down. So if you want to operate, then you need to shut this off. You got 2 hours. And there are a lot of ways to do it. A lot of ways to make people unwelcome. And if that makes people listening or viewing what we're doing right here uncomfortable, then all I would ask is, that's fine that you're uncomfortable. Get out of the way because there's a war on and we don't need you in the middle if you're not sure what's actually going on because we're on the precipice of losing everything. Here's another example. In December, I briefed a governor who asked me to come in because they're getting refugees, Afghan refugees, into their community. And first thing I showed him is like, here are the Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, ISIS, and Hamas operatives wearing suits operating inside the federal government. And I said, now you really think they're vetting your Afghan refugees, right? But the point was, he asked, well, what can I do when they're literally flying them in and landing at one of our airports? I'm like, I don't know. You have a National Guard here? You have State Guard? Yes. Well, what if 100 of them were at the airport and when the plane lands and it's taxiing, your National Guard vehicles with National Guard troops are there? They say, yeah, no, nobody gets off this plane. You take that crap, you take right back off, you go land in someone else's state. And if you land here again, we're going to have legal issues with you. I'm going to take whoever's in charge of this thing into custody. How's that? Does he have the authority to do it? You're damn right he does. Because they don't meet, first of all, the legal definition of a refugee, number one. Number two, they're being brought in. The FBI is telling them they're vetted. How are you vetting them? How are you vetting people that don't know their own birth dates? I can tell you from being over there, most people who grew up in Afghanistan, they don't know their own birthday. You want to know why most of their birth dates are January 1st of some year? Because nobody knows, because nobody cares. And you're going to vet them how? What system in Afghanistan do they have to vet their people? None. We can't even keep Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, ISIS, and Hamas guys out of the U.S. government. And you're going to tell me you're going to vet somebody living in a village, Afghanistan, doesn't know their, I mean, give me a break. So there are legal ways, but what it requires is knowledge and courage. And I haven't seen one governor yet do anything like this, not one. But these are things that need to be done at the local and state level that can be done. And all it requires are citizens to put the branding iron to the backside of these governors and county officials, proverbially speaking, of course. So I believe the reason the FBI has taken so long to respond to what they consider the threat from Mr. Trump is more about the greater movement, the hostile movement inside the United States, than it is about just the timing of an investigation. It is true that these kind of investigations take time. But I would say we know all kinds of information about the communist movement in the United States. We know that we've got at least 70 members of Congress that we can easily identify as part of the communist movement. 70. You've got 23 former senators and congressmen, and that's at the low end, that are literally working with, being paid by companies directly working for Chinese military, Chinese intelligence. You have Mr. Biden and his son himself engaged in at least $30 to $40 million worth of business dealings with the leader of the state security apparatus in China. This is treason on both sides of the political aisle. This is the hostile movement I'm talking about. So when they begin doing these things, in all deference to some of my colleagues who have called it a banana republic and things like that, this is not. This is tyranny. These are Stalinist tactics that are used in tyrannies. And that's where we are. And so they just feel we can get away with this now, and let's see what happens. Oh, nothing. Nothing from the American people, nothing from the quote opposing political party, but there's a one-party system right now. We've seen that the fact that they just raided the home of a former president of the United States, it's not just a historic time. I don't think people are getting what keeps happening. And these things keep happening. They've been happening for 15 years, but now it's right in your face. The tyranny is real. Your data not protected. It's not at all. You should assume if you transmit it, somebody has it. And I know a lot of people have started using other means to communicate, but if you transmit it, you cannot be 100% sure somebody's not going to see it or has the capacity to get their hands on it. And I certainly wouldn't trust Google, Facebook, Twitter, and other telecom companies with your information. There is what I think, certainly evidence on the table that Google is sharing information with communist China. You've got leaders of Facebook and Twitter going to Pakistan and sitting down with jihadi leaders, terrorists in our law, who say you can't allow anything on your platform if it offends Muslims. And instead of saying, hey, go screw yourself, you don't want to have Facebook in your country, don't have Facebook. But see, this is called free speech. If it offends you, tough crap. You don't have a right not to be offended. That's what free speech is all about. If a law gets broken, if there's a viable threat, that's a different story. But saying something that offends you, that just means you're too thin-skinned or you're not intellectually savvy enough to have a good discussion. Have a nice day. But that's not what they did. That's not what Zuckerberg did. What he said is, I'll take a knee for you, jihadi, and we'll bend to your will. You've literally, let me be clear here. We just saw it a few weeks ago in England. Somebody posts something on social media, it offended someone else, they got reported, and 4 police officers show up to that person's house and threaten to arrest them because they offended someone. This stuff is happening in the United States as well. And the FBI is a big part of this. And the Department of Justice, absent from the battle, meaning they're batting for the other side. So in response to Zuckerberg's comments to Joe Rogan about the FBI and their influence on Facebook, what we've seen on the other social media platforms, that is government overreach. That is government suppressing free speech. Now, I think Zuckerberg's a weasel for trying to blame what he did on the FBI, saying, well, they said it's a Russian information operation. That's not the purpose of free speech and free expression. Let it all hang out and let individual citizens decide what's a lie and what's the truth. That's the beauty of the West and the Western intellectual thought. Yeah, let people lie. Yeah, let people tell the truth. So this idea that the federal government in the form of the FBI is telling a massive social media outlet like Facebook to suppress the story because it's Russia collusion, or Russia disinformation. Again, tyranny. It's right there. It's just another example. If the FBI is falsifying FISA applications to electronically surveil the President of the United States, and they're calling up major social media companies, what are they doing that we don't know about? There's a lot of information out there that's muddied. When the government does something that's nefarious, often, in my experience, starts out as a good idea gone very awry. So if we look at the NSA program to capture phone calls, that blew up both under Bush and then kind of drifted into Obama under Mr. Holder. And that program worked, the program to intercept, and it was based on known foreign hostile numbers. I'm going to say it this way because I got to be careful here. There was a matrix, whereas collection was then done. right? And key numbers that we knew were like Al Qaeda safe houses, or a leader of this group, or people that were spies from Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, or bad guys. And boom, that would immediately 100% we'd be listening to that, as we should. And if that guy happened to call a U.S. citizen, you're damn right we're going to listen to that. And I'd like to know, why is a guy overseas at this number that we know is an Al Qaeda guy calling you? That is at least reasonable suspicion to at least capture the call. And I will tell you, I have personal knowledge of a case where that worked. And not just one. This was something that I had direct impact on. So I saw it work. And yet I'd run into people at, parties or social events or places I was speaking, and I'd be like, I don't want the government listening to me. And I'm like, the government doesn't care about you and talking to your kids. That's not how it works. There was a system set about what would get intercepted that was reasonable. Where the program got into trouble was what's supposed to happen is a human is supposed to listen to those calls. As soon as you realize there's nothing here, the call gets deleted and you're no longer in the system. By the time it got to kind of Eric Holder, the Attorney General at the time, he's like, we've got all these calls that nobody's gone through. That's the problem. You can't just hold someone's transmission. If you got to determine it's either hostile, then why aren't we opening a case? Or no, there was nothing here. Then delete it and move on, right? And I'm simplifying it, but that's essentially it. So regarding the shootings in Las Vegas during the country music concert, we reported on that before anyone else, that was likely a jihadi attack. We briefed quietly a couple people, members of Congress and others. And I would say to this day, there is not an understanding. When you look at what actually transpired, you put it together from a counterintelligence, espionage, and counterterrorism look, the probability that was an ISIS attack is well over 90%. When presented with the information, the SAC of the Las Vegas field office got angry and dismissed it. When presented with the information, FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. dismissed it out of hand. I have a quote from an FBI agent. He said the FBI, both in Washington, LA, and Las Vegas, that participated in that investigation, can't even begin to think of it as a jihadi attack because, number one, they still don't understand what that actually means. They don't understand what actually happened, and they have no desire to understand what happens. So their knee-jerk reaction in these cases is always to dismiss that and point in a different direction because they've been conditioned to do so. I mean, it only points to an ISIS attack. It does not point anywhere else. ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack 5 times. They said that guy, he's our guy, and we hail him, he is a martyr, but it's more than that. I mean, there's one of the key guys that was a part of that who claimed to be he's a gay Australian guy. And we said, well, here's where this guy is. He lied as to his whereabouts. And when he said he was here, he was actually at a hotel in Las Vegas. And the only other people staying in the hotel are people from an area of Mexico where there's high ISIS activity. That's not definitive. That's just one data point. But then he went to New Mexico and his phone pings in a cafe owned by a Turkish guy tied to ISIS. And then he goes overseas. Who flies from the United States to Australia and stays for 2 days and comes back with potential ties to Australia and Antifa? And then he goes to Germany. Right now, there's no other option on the table. All the evidence points to that. That's all we're saying. We're saying the fact the FBI hasn't investigated it is unprofessional and criminally negligent. That is a great question. Why has the FBI not done anything about Antifa and literally has said they're not really an organization? Like, really, they're not an organization. When they have organizational meetings, they literally have meetings with BLM and jihadis. They meet and they plan and they organize and then they act on those meetings. So I'm not sure what you're talking about. But the question, why doesn't the current administration, specifically FBI, why aren't they recognizing that? Well, I'd go back and say because I think this current administration is batting for the adversaries of America. That's why. I think your question is logical in the sense that I would expect anyone to ask you, as a reasonable question, but it's illogical if you understand that this administration is hostile. And whether it's the director Ray is just stepping in line or he's too ignorant or dumb, but let me make this point, because I haven't said this, and I think it's something we briefed back in 2006 and 7. When someone swears an oath to the Constitution to protect and defend against all enemies, that's a legal standard. And so you have to either know all enemies or do a due diligence to know all enemies. If you don't, and it's easy to know that Antifa is a real organization, that they might operate differently than you understand because you don't understand asymmetric warfare or regular warfare, that's your fault, and you're unprofessional. When Americans are dead because you're unprofessional, legally that's called criminal negligence. And we put doctors and lawyers in jail. And I think we should put people like Christopher Wray and Eric Holder and many others in jail for criminal negligence. And they are criminally negligent at a minimum. I'll leave it to my colleagues who are constitutional law attorneys, whether it's treason and sedition, but it's certainly criminally negligent. Why do communists and jihadis work together, and what does that network look like? Within a couple of years of 9/11, you started seeing anti-war protests in Washington, D.C. and all over the country, but we see communist groups like Answer, Act Now, Stop War, and Racism, Code Pink, and others doing joint anti-war protests with Muslim Brotherhood groups like the Islamic Society of North America and their subsidiaries. Hamas doing business as the Council on American Islamic Relations. That raised a flag because we knew about, at that point, the Islamic network in the United States. But we saw them working with communists. The jihadi movement in the United States really started developing in the 1960s and exploded in the 1980s, but took a seismic shot into space in the early 1990s. Well, we can watch how they, their touch points, but then they start working directly with the communists. To today, we had almost 2 years ago, Communist China enters in a formal strategic partnership with the Islamic Republic of Iran, the largest state-sponsored terrorism. Black Lives Matter was formed out of the largest Chinese communist organization in the United States. So they were never a civil rights organization. They were never about equal rights. They were always about communism. They were always about enslaving people. They were always about destroying the United States. That's not up for debate. If someone says, well, I disagree, well, you're wrong. And you can never be right, because that's who they have always been. And as a matter of fact, BLM and their associates are working with Chinese Communist Party officials in the United States at the consulates, and then down at the local level. We see these groups, communists and jihadis, literally working seamlessly in local communities where you have all these Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas groups working with Antifa, communist, Black Lives Matter, communist, Democratic Socialists of America, communist, Communist Party USA, Code Pink, Answer, and all the others. Yeah. I say the same thing I've written about almost every year since 9/11, is that number one, the network of jihadis that support attacks in the United States has been untouched since 9/11. And that network is made up of all the prominent Islamic organizations in the United States. And we have to stop being afraid to say that. And that's not my opinion, that's a matter of fact. Those facts are in evidence in the largest terrorism financing trial in American history, the Holy Land Foundation trial for relief and development, adjudicated 2008 in Dallas, Texas. And the fact is, the biggest Islamic organizations in the United States are controlled by either mostly the Muslim Brotherhood, but also Iranian groups, Hezbollah groups, and others. And the leaders of those groups are exclusively the people advising your U.S. government, State Department, Treasury, National Security staffs, President, Vice President, etc., through multiple administrations. That is the problem. Those people have to account for 9/11. To the deeper question of was 9/11 an inside job, I've had people come up to me and say, well, it was a missile that hit the Pentagon and there was explosives in the towers. And I'm like, you know what? You're full of crap. Because I was in the inner rings of the Pentagon where the fuselage of the freaking airplane was. And guess what? People had seats on an airplane and we knew their names because we knew their tickets. And they're nowhere to be found, except their remains were found in the Pentagon. So you are a jackass and you're dangerous because you're inserting things that aren't true. So I understand people that don't trust the federal government. That's pretty much been our discussion, because there are nefarious people and there are people who are grossly unprofessional. But we did know something was coming, and it was briefed to the President of the United States, and people were scrambling to figure out what it was. And we had cable memos going from FBI field office. By the way, that field office right here in Phoenix, Ken Williams, sending those messages. Hey, by the way, they're learning to fly planes and not land. We know they're doing something. And it was too little, too late. There were people out there like, okay, who are bad guys? What's going on? What's the point? Who was helping these people? Well, the Islamic Center of San Diego, a Muslim Brotherhood mosque. Who helped the jihadi who killed 4 Marines and a Navy sailor in Chattanooga? The Muslim Brotherhood's Islamic Society of Chattanooga. Who helped the Boston Marathon bombers? The Islamic Society of Boston, founded by an Al-Qaeda guy, owned by the Muslim Brotherhood here in the United States. And what's happened to those? Nothing. Nothing in 21 years. That is criminal negligence. And I believe every police chief and every state investigative agency and every local FBI office that hadn't done anything, they should be arrested. They're the problem because they have left this network untouched. For those of you who still think 9/11 is an inside job, you know what? I probably should hold my tongue, because nothing I want to say right now is good. But you're wrong. Let me just say that. 9/11 wasn't an inside job, because if you look at what we were doing leading up to 9/11, we knew something was coming. We had some ideas. We didn't have any specifics. And the reason was because we didn't realize that the Muslims advising our federal government are backing the other team. Just like how the Japanese were in there talking to us when they knew planes were in the air headed to Pearl Harbor, right? That's the level of deception. Name me one Islamic advisor at the national level right now who's not hostile. We've looked, we can't find it. By name, we'll give them to you. I am not afraid of speaking out, and I'm not afraid of the repercussions of speaking out. I've had the repercussions of speaking out. You know, I've been shot at, and blown up in combat, been shot at as an FBI agent. I've had jihadis threaten me. I've had commies threaten me, threaten to come to my house and kill me. I've had cases investigated by the FBI, real no BS jihadis who threatened and were taking actions to come after me. I think to cower in the face of these adversaries means I then participate in the destruction of the republic, and I just won't do it no matter what the cost. And there is a cost. I was audited several years in a row by the IRS. I've mentioned some of the things lately. I was on TSA watch list recently for 18 months. But it's not about me. I mean, I just don't believe that you should ever cower. These people are evil. And what we stand for in America is good, and it's right, and it's just. And remember, our founders, for the first time in world history, created something that never existed before and built on those founding principles, law of nature's God, with the social compact that we will allow you to rule over so long as you rule justly, and you can legislate laws so long as they don't violate the founding. That produces liberty, and liberty produces creativity, and the creativity of us Americans creating the car and the plane and the microchip and rock and roll, for God's sakes. And then that creates prosperity. And this has been the richest nation in the history of the world. And by the way, the most generous nation that is the beacon for the entire world, because at the center is that God is the author of all liberty, and he is good, and his heart is good. And when our laws and our culture are built on that, we produce good people, and people who at least work and strive to be good. And how can that not be worth defending? Let me think about that. My message for young people is, what do you want your life to be? What do you want? What do you want your life to reflect? What's the value of your life? Is it just to go to school, get a good job, have a family, and die? What is it? What is it? And I would say what this world needs are men and women whose hearts have come alive. And so find out what is it that makes your heart come alive and go do that. Because if that's what you're doing and it's good and it's of service to others and you find joy in it, man, as some people have said, you'll never work a day in your life. I think being of service to the community and the service to this nation, I think anytime you do that, and that's the greatest message I can give is how can what we've talked about here today, what America is supposed to be, not what it is right now, what those ideals are. There is no greater joy than fighting for that. The worst they can do is take your life. And if you're so afraid of dying, then you're not ready to live. I think you've got to get rid of that fear and just live and speak truth and learn how to communicate the truth in a loving, meaningful way. And you will watch the power of that within your circle of friends and in your community. And literally, it can change the entire nation. I mean, think about it. Just 20 young people in a community did that. Now multiply that by 1,000 or more. I think there's nothing that can't be brought about by speaking truth boldly in love like that. I think people hear this discussion and might feel very depressed, like, holy cow, this is much worse than I thought. And I would say there's great hope, because the great hope is in the American spirit, which is the American people. But that cannot be decoupled from our founding principles. The law of nature, and the law of nature is God. God's will is he expresses himself in creation and Holy Scripture. You just simply cannot decouple those two things. So long as we return to those founding principles and reestablish the founding principles at the local level and build out from there, I think there's great hope to reestablish the republic. It's going to be a job, but it can't be done separately without the power and the love of God at the center of all that.
All right, so there you go, guys. Let me end this one, and I'll go set up the other one. We'll watch Bloody Hill. I've seen it. I can't remember exactly what it was about, but I think it was mostly about Rosanna Borland, if I'm not mistaken. But let me end this one. We can check and see if my notification thing's working. So give me 10 minutes or so, and I'll throw another one on here. Thanks again, Goofy, for helping get all these out. See you guys in a little bit.